Boom, 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 boom. A side, B side. What side are you on?
Welcome back. It's another episode of A Side B Side Podcast. What's going on? I'm Brooke Summers. That's Adam Weingarten. What's up, Adam?
Not too much. Trying to survive this strange new reality we live in and also not break anything.
Well, today, huge day.
Yes.
I have on my, I'm not going to even lie, I think it's pretty obvious what our feelings are. I have on my, it says BYEDON 2020. Get it?
I do. It is incredible. It's not incredible. It's actually kind of expected, but the dude just pieced out. Like he couldn't even go through the motions. Like this is the equivalent of like when it comes to the custody hearing, the one parent just not showing up.
And apparently he left a note or something. I don't know if he really wrote it, or if he did, it probably said something that's not for public ears.
Have you seen the internet memes where it's like the mom from Full House or from Home Alone yelling, "Baron!" Like, shoot, we forgot him.
That's funny.
Probably the best thing that could happen to the kid. Like, the Bidens would just take him in.
Oh, I know. And they'd be so good.
Yeah. He'd be like, it's okay. I'll stay here.
They're going to find Barron in the Lincoln room or something.
Yeah. Hiding in a like Emmanuel Lewis, like dumbwaiter thing. Like Webster.
They're gonna come looking for Major and Champ, and Barron's gonna be playing with them like, oh, I got busted.
I was like, oh, I'm sorry, you guys have dogs. Can I stay? Also, you're not my parents. It's great.
So today, of course, 46th President of the United States inaugurated the speech. Amazing that not only do we have a 46th president, we also have our very first female, our first African-American vice president, female vice president, and Asian vice president. Like, she just has the trifecta wrapped up in that baby, and it's amazing. We have our first male, our first male second gentleman, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important for all of the white men to understand it's cool to be second gentleman.
Yeah.
Because that's not something we're used to, and we need to embrace that because we've been really bad at doing the other stuff.
People were trying to make fun of the fact that they created the second gentleman Twitter, and it's like, that's what he is.
Yeah.
Shut up and sit down.
And in Minnesota, the lieutenant governor has been female for many times, but most recently the last 4 years. And it's been second gentleman here. And that guy was like, whatever. It's like, cool. It's like, I've been doing this for a while. Like, welcome to the club.
And I love that her husband is like 100% here. But he's like, yeah, I'm Kamala's husband.
Yeah. Heck yeah, he should be.
So, of course, that was a big thing going on. Also want to say thank you to, now, Adam, you'll have to correct me if I say it wrong. Janice Fringer this week.
You said it perfect.
Yes. Janice became a member on Buy Me a Coffee and also ordered, I think she liked your recommendation of the Bad Vibes Save Lives t-shirt last week, because that's the one that she got. And of course, that is available on our website, A-Side, B-Side, podcast.square.site. And it's true. Bad vibes do save lives. If you got that gut feeling that something is wrong, trust it. I even picked up the after seeing our friend Aurora in our Trust Your Guts, They're Probably Nuts tee in pink. I had to get it myself because it was like, she's so adorable. So then I was like, maybe I'll be that adorable. And so I got one.
And I will say that even though it is at this point like 27 years too late, Janice, I accept this as your apology for beating me in the geography bee back in 2000 or like 1993. You were a year ahead of me, so clearly you knew more states and countries, so it was kind of rigged. But,
no, just like Doug is taking a step back as second gentleman, take a step back as number 2 in the geography bee.
That's fair. I it's the only thing that I have ever come in second to. Yeah, it's weird. Like, I'm not saying that is a bad thing, but like I've come in last a lot of times. It's coming like third, fourth. I've come in first a couple times, but that's the only thing I can remember ever coming in second to. So
Okay. All right.
I celebrate that.
So thank you, Janice, to you for becoming a member on Buy Me a Coffee. You guys can support the show. You can buy us a coffee, buymeacoffee.com/A-side, B-side pod. All of the proceeds go towards promotion and production of the show, which could include coffee because, well, we know Adam likes to talk. So there's a lot of editing.
A lot of editing happening. The coffee goes directly to Brooke so she can deal with the fact that I interrupt mostly every sentence that she says. Like, you guys don't hear it because she edits it out, but like, imagine she's speaking and I'm just speaking in the background like a small child being like, but.
Also, I do need to apologize for a mispronunciation that I had in a previous podcast, episode 23. That was one of our Christmas episodes, and we were talking about a case from the UK. I mistakenly said the city's name is Leicester, and it is actually Leicestershire. So I apologize to our listeners in the UK. Please feel free to correct me as I was corrected, because I won't learn if you don't tell me. I'll just keep saying Leicester and sounding like an American. So,
So Leicestershire, please call off the dogs on Twitter because it's getting vicious.
So Leicestershire is the correct pronunciation, and not
Leicestershire.
I was told Leicestershire.
I'm not English. I'm barely American.
It was written out for me phonetically, Leicestershire.
I will trust that because I don't have any.
I know it's not Leicester.
Yes, we can both agree on that. It is not the chest of lies that you place your.
Also, new Night Stalker series is out. I have not watched it yet. I'm dying to watch it. If you've watched it, please tell us what you think. A-side, B-side podcasts at gmail.com. We want to know what you think about it. And well, actually anything else. If you have any info for the show, maybe you have a case you want us to talk about, maybe you've got a movie you want to talk about, we would love to hear from you. Leicestershire. That's what it was written down for me as, Leicestershire. What did you say it is?
I don't know. I'm just making things worse.
All right. So last week we flipped it around and Adam did the the B side. I did the A side. We're back to normal this week, which means Adam is kicking off the A side next.
Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I sure would like to make a podcast. I've got so much to say about blank. Well, if you haven't heard about Anchor, you really should. It is the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's absolutely free. All right, I'm going to tell you why it's so easy. Okay, so with Anchor, there's creation tools that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many others. And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Trust me, I'm so excited about this. You can be too. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started.
It is now time for the A side, where I talk about movies, nostalgia, media, stuff that has been stuck in my brain for the last 7 days and helps me process the memories that I cannot get rid of. This one has actually been sitting in my brain for 2 weeks. So in the first round of the NFL playoffs, the American football playoffs, the Buffalo Bills won their first game since 1995.
Can I just interject here and say, the Bills! Sorry, I'm from Buffalo.
No, I know you are. And that's entirely why I'm doing this, because I'm absolutely sucking up.
Okay.
So in that game, the first game of the playoffs, the Bills actually set several records. In that game, neither team committed a turnover, and it marks Buffalo's second playoff game ever in which there were no turnovers, last one being in the Super Bowl in 1991. It was the fourth time the Bills not commit a turnover in a playoff game. So the first, like the Super Bowl was that no one committed two turnovers. It was the fourth time that the Bills did not commit a turnover in a playoff game ever, starting with December of 1964, January of 1991, and January of 1993, and as well January of 1991. The Bills closed out the first half against Colts with a 96-yard drive, which ended with a 5-yard touchdown run by Josh Allen. Woo! The touchdown drive was the longest in Bills postseason history, eclipsing the previous long of 93 yards, which took place in 1963. The two teams in that game combined for 869 total yards, which are the third most in a Buffalo playoff game, behind a game in 1995 versus Miami and a game in 1991 against Miami, because evidently Miami doesn't play any defense.
That's our big rival too.
Yeah. Did I mention all of these historic Bills feats to flatter Brooke? Yes. Yes, I did.
100%.
But it does not change the fact that history was made in the first weekend of the playoffs. Then there was also the story of Taylor Heinicke. He was a nobody, a backup to a backup, a player who was not even on the Washington football team's roster until late in the season. 3 years ago, he tried out for the New England Patriots. He showed up the day he signed his contract, trying to be the one who was first at the facility, except Tom Brady, the New England Patriots quarterback, was already there at 5:30 a.m. and looked at him and said, "Who the hell are you? You can't be here." Heinicke wasn't enough for the Washington football team to win in the first week of the 2020-2021 playoffs. However, he did create an earworm or a mental worm for me for at least a week. He played oddly awesome for a guy who hadn't been in football for a year and a half and had literally brought in off the street. He had 306 passing yards, 46 rushing yards, and 2 total touchdowns. He stepped out of obscurity and went toe-to-toe with that same Tom Brady, even if he learned in the end that he would not win. And I said to myself, this is so crazy. Like, how is this guy that came out of nowhere suddenly going up against a 6-time Super Bowl winning quarterback and for the most of the game going toe-to-toe? This is like a made-up Hollywood story. And then I went, wait a second. This is exactly like a made-up Hollywood story. Because Taylor Heinicke's effort reminded me of Willie Beeman, or Fast Willie Beeman, from the movie Any Given Someday. In the movie, Willie Beeman is a third-string quarterback who has no business playing in the NFL, but suddenly gets thrust into not only a game, but into the spotlight. He also holds the record for the fastest endorsement deal because he plays one game and gets an endorsement deal in the movie, which is nothing that's ever happened before. The film, Any Given Sunday, is a sports movie, but it isn't a sports movie. Oliver Stone, who is more known for his war and spy and controversy movies than he is sports movies, wrote and even stars in this film as one of the announcers. The film is more about the stuff that surrounds the game than it is the game itself. Taylor Heinicke's performance inspired me to think of how Willie Beeman came out of nowhere in Any Given Sunday, but then I started to look at the film, and there is so much more in the film that is almost like a talisman or a look into the future for how the NFL has changed. Now, this movie came out in 1999. In 1999, I was a senior in high school. We were very scared that all of our computers were going to stop working on like Y2K. Mm-hmm. It was a very different time. None of that actually happened. I was still a senior in high school, but none of our computers crashed. But this movie actually predicted things far beyond Taylor Heineke coming out of nowhere and having a great game. One of the things that made Willie Beeman interesting in his first play, he goes out there, he's so nervous, he pukes. Well, about 4 years later, a quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl did the exact same thing. Now, Donovan McNabb, who played at Syracuse and is an incredible quarterback, it is debated to this day whether he had been out at the clubs the night before, whether he was just nervous. But just like Willie Beeman, he pukes on the field in the huddle and then decides to keep going.
Ew.
Yeah, that happened in the movie, and it happened in the Super Bowl. Well, the idea of an unknown QB like Willie Beeman suddenly becoming a hit isn't that crazy. It happens all the time. Any Given Sunday actually predicted the biggest issue that the NFL is still dealing with today. Before COVID, the biggest medical issue that the NFL was dealing with was concussions. And in 1999, the reason that Any Given Sunday does not get to use any of the NFL teams is because the NFL didn't want anything to do with the movie that talked about concussions. NFL great Lawrence Taylor plays a linebacker by the name of Luther Shark LeVay, who, from the word go, at the beginning of the movie, you could tell he's a health risk in some way. He has anger issues. He has ability to control his emotion issues. And he is clearly a victim of multiple concussions. However, they just keep playing him. Just as many NFL teams have played injured players. And this week, we are in a conundrum as a fan base of football. So, Brooke, I don't know if you watched any of the games this past weekend, but in the Kansas City Chiefs Cleveland Browns game, Patrick Mahomes, who is the reigning Super Bowl MVP, former NFL MVP, he's the most important player on the Kansas City Chiefs, got knocked out of the game with a concussion.
Yes, I heard that.
So his team, and it was a very seemingly innocuous play. It didn't look like, it wasn't one of those plays where they're both running across the field and somebody flies out of the air and helmet to helmet and they spin around. It seemed like a regular type of tackle, but his neck got torqued and his head went into the ground. And he is now in concussion protocol. And it is Wednesday when we're recording this. We still don't know if he's going to play on Sunday. And there is a legitimate question that even if he does, would this movie from 1999, which talked about a team wanting to win so badly and putting someone out on the field that wasn't in their best interest, this is 20 years ago, 21 years ago, and we're still dealing with the same potential questions. Another thing that the movie did that was unique was that it had the idea of an active female owner. In the first act of the movie, it vilifies the female owner as a money-hungry, non-football fan, almost as equating her with the owner from Major League or any other sports movie where someone's just out for money and they're not going to try to make the team better. What I had forgotten when I rewatched this movie is that the owner is played by Cameron Diaz. And Cameron Diaz, in every other movie, is eminently likable. She is hard to dislike. She always plays sweet characters. She's got an amazing smile. But in this movie, she is a badass business person who's looking for the best for her business. But in 1999, there was no one in the league that was female and running a team. To this day, there may be female owners, but none who are running it in the way that she was portrayed. So we're still 21 years behind that part of the movie. The movie speaks to how winning in spite of everything is the goal. But the new reality is that in the NFL, it's not about winning, it's about just playing. This season, we have seen teams play when they have not had any quarterbacks available because of COVID. We have seen games postponed. We have seen a team play a playoff game without their head coach because he was in contact tracing.
Mm-hmm.
In the grand scheme of the NFL today, playing the game is more important than the result. And that is another thing that Any Given Sunday seemed to point out. As long as the games are played, the higher end of the spectrum wins. They get the gates, they get the advertising revenue, they get the attention, and they move on. But those in the trenches, those players who are potentially injured, might have concussions, are easily tossed away. And that a movie 21 years ago pointed this out, vilified it, had a cast of, like, there is not a person in this cast that you do not recognize. Al Pacino, Cameron Diaz, Dennis Quaid, James Woods, Jamie Foxx as Willie Beeman, LL Cool J, Matthew Modine, the great Jim Brown, and Lawrence Taylor. Bill Bellamy, who walked off the set of MTV and suddenly was a wide receiver in a movie. Leela Rochon, Lauren Holly, and Margaret. Aaron Eckhart, Elizabeth Berkley, like the entire cast clearly made the choice to say, I want to be part of this movie because one, it's an Oliver Stone movie. One, it's going to be an important movie. And 21 years later, we've learned nothing. We're still doing the same stuff. And this will air on Friday, which means in 36 hours, Kansas City Chiefs could put onto the field their best player who only 5 days ago was concussed. It's not life imitating art. It's life not learning from art. And it is disappointing. And I expect better.
But here's the question. Are you going to watch?
Yeah, that's the thing. They know I will. and honestly, that's all that matters. And I'll watch if Patrick Mahomes is playing, and I'll watch if Chad Henne is playing, who's his backup. Because to go all the way back to the beginning, when Taylor Heineke, this guy who legitimately was out of football and going back to college in the middle of this season, almost beat Tom Brady. It's a good drug, and I'm hooked, and all of us are. And in a way that makes me complicit in the health risks that we ask these players to make.
But as long as you recognize that, and you're not like, no, it's them, not me. And you're like, no, I mean, I'm part of it, 100%.
I mean, I like watching Patrick Mahomes play football a lot.
Patrick Mahomes likes playing football a lot.
Yeah. I just don't want to watch him play football in a way that's going to 20 years down the line mean he can't function. I mean, we've seen.
Well, didn't they try like new helmets and all these new different things? And like even the players are like, nah.
Yeah, I mean, they've got new helmets. They've got a lot of rules that protect certain types of plays, but it's a violent, angry sport. And like, you can never take that out of it. I just wish there was a way that I know right now there are advertising executives, there are executives from the NFL, there might even be executives from the Kansas City Chiefs who want him to play even if he can't.
Right.
because they know more people will watch if he plays. Even if he's 60% of who he is, he's better than Chad Henne. No offense to Chad Henne. Chad Henne is a very nice backup quarterback. But when you have an MVP, you're going to do everything you can to get him on the field, and he's going to do everything he can to get on the field. But at some point, it feels like we're complicit, and we are, in watching someone trade their current potential for glory for a long-term health risk.
Well, that was a very different A-side.
Yeah, sorry. Any Given Sunday, great movie about football. Also makes you kind of hate everybody involved in football. So go check it out. It's available on Amazon Prime for $3.99.
And then later, rated on Letterboxd.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the A-side?
That's the A-side.
All right. Okay, so Adam, a couple weeks ago, I know you have heard the episode, but a couple weeks ago, it was episode 26.
Mm-hmm.
It was about the lady lawyer,
Yes.
Alberta Jones. Well, while researching for Alberta Jones, I found another badass female that I wanted to talk about that I had never heard her story before. And it's an important story. Just like we said, Alberta's story is so important, especially in these days. This story is just as important in this day and in this climate. This story is about the only white female who's honored at the Civil Rights Museum, the Civil Rights Memorial. She is considered one of the most controversial civil rights martyrs ever. Her name is Viola Liuzzo. Viola Gregg Liuzzo. This is her story. So Viola was born April 11th of 1925. She was a housewife and, as we've learned, a civil rights activist. She was born in California, Pennsylvania, which is a real place. It's a very small place, though. As of 2010 census, the population in California, Pennsylvania was 6,795, but it's estimated that in 2018, it was up to around, it was down to around 6,325. It's part of the Pittsburgh Metro and has been since 1950. So Viola was the oldest daughter of Ava Wilson, who was a teacher, and Herbert Ernest Gregg, a coal miner and World War I veteran. Herbert left the school at the age of 13 in the 8th grade, but he continued to learn because he taught himself how to read. Ava, or Evangeline, who was Viola's mom, had a teaching certificate from the University of Pittsburgh. The couple had one other daughter. Her name was Rosemary, and she was born in the 1930s. So while on the job as a coal miner, Herbert's right hand was blown off in a mine explosion.
Damn.
So rough start to Viola's life, you know?
Yeah.
So during the Great Depression, the family's only income came solely from Ava. She had short-term teaching positions that were really sporadic. I mean, just, a little here, a little there. So the family's financial situation worsened and they had to do something. So they packed up and they moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where Ava found a job teaching when Viola was just 6 years old. So the family was really poor. Now, again, white family, very poor. They lived in a one-room shack with no running water. The schools that Viola attended didn't have adequate supplies, and the teachers were so busy that they didn't have a lot of extra time to devote additional attention to children in need. Sound familiar at all? This seems to have been a constant problem in American education. We don't value our teachers enough and give them enough supplies. Anyway, so since the family moved a lot, Viola had the distinction, a not very good distinction, of never starting and ending the school year in the same place. She spent most of her childhood and adolescence in poor areas in Tennessee. She experienced the segregated nature of the South firsthand. This experience is what helps shape Viola and shape her viewpoint and determination when she gets into activism. It was during these years that Viola realized that even in her situation, racism was rampant. So Viola realized there was privilege. There's a lot of people, even in Viola's position, that don't see privilege. They say, I'm white, I'm poor, there's no such thing as privilege. But there is privilege. No one said that just because you have privilege doesn't mean you don't have a struggle. But your standing alone gives you that privilege, an extra bump ahead, if you will. And Viola saw this firsthand. So Viola, like I said, Viola saw this firsthand because even though her family was very poor, she still saw that they had privileges that Blacks did not have, especially under Jim Crow laws. In 1941, Viola's family moved to, I am going to say this completely wrong, and I'm so sorry, Michigan. Ypsilanti. Oh, so I said it right.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah.
So they moved to Ypsilanti, Michigan, where her father pursued a job assembling bombs. I guess he said, well, I know what not to do.
Why not?
So he got a job assembling bombs at the Ford Motor Company. Viola, strong-willed in nature, as we will definitely see, dropped out of high school after a year.
So this must have been during the war period when Ford Motor Company was like switching their production to bombs.
Yeah, 1941.
Yeah, okay, cool. Just giving you context.
So
he wasn't just going to Ford plant and making bombs.
No. Yeah, this was in 1941. So yes. So Viola drops out of high school after 1 year and she elopes at the age of 16. That marriage didn't last, and then she went back with her family. 2 years later, the Gregg family moves again. They moved from Ypsilanti to Detroit, which, similar to her Southern upbringing, was extremely segregated. And this is in the 40s. There's a war going on. So tensions between the races were really high. And there was a lot of violence. There was rioting. So seeing all these vile acts was just another major motivator for Viola in her steps toward civil rights activism. So you've got her noticing the privilege, even with segregation, the privilege, even with being poor in a segregated South. And now you've got these acts of violence, and this is just her. It's not sitting right with her. In 1943, at the age of 18, Viola marries for the second time. Her second husband, named George Argans, was the manager of a restaurant where she worked. Viola and George had 2 daughters, Penny and Evangeline Mary. Well, this marriage didn't last long either. It lasted about 6 years, and they divorced in 1949.
Hey, 6 years ain't nothing to scoff at.
That's true. They had 2 beautiful daughters. For Viola, third time was the charm. In 1950, she married Anthony James Liuzzo. He was a Teamster organizer, and together they had 3 more children. They had Tommy, Anthony Jr., and Sally. Viola returned to school. She attended the Carnegie Institute in Detroit, and in 1962, she even enrolled part-time at Wayne State University. In 1964, Viola began attending the First Universalist Church of Detroit, and her steps towards civil rights activism go even further when she joins the NAACP. A large part of Viola's activism, particularly with the NAACP, was due to a close friendship with a woman named Sarah Evans, an African-American woman. After initially meeting in a grocery store where Viola worked as a cashier, the two kept in touch. Sarah became Viola's housekeeper while still maintaining a close, friendly relationship because they shared similar views, including support for the civil rights movement. Now, Sarah is going to become a very important figure in a little bit. Viola so passionately believed in the fight for civil rights. Let me just stop here and say, and I know that this is not unique. Viola was not the only white woman in the civil rights movement. Yes, there were plenty, but we're talking about her for a reason. So for her to feel this passionately when she has 5 children of her own,
she got a lot on her plate.
In the 40s, 50s, 60s is pretty darn incredible. Okay. Viola understands what it means to be an ally. So Viola passionately believed in the fight for civil rights, so much so that she helped organize protests. She attended civil rights conferences and worked with the NAACP in many events. She had a strong desire to make a difference on as large of a scale as possible. So in addition to actively supporting the civil rights movement, she also was known for her protests against Detroit's law that allowed for students to more easily drop out of school. Her disagreement with that law led her to withdrawing her children from school in protest. So she deliberately homeschooled them for 2 months, breaking the law and getting arrested. This woman is hardcore, okay? She stood her ground. She went to court. She pled guilty and was placed on probation. In 1965, a night demonstration for voting rights at the Marion, Alabama courthouse turned violent. State troopers clubbed marchers and beat and shot 26-year-old Jimmy Lee Jackson, a black man who unfortunately lost his life. His death spurred the fight for the civil rights movement in Selma. The SCLC, which is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, scheduled a protest march for Sunday, March 7th of 1965. Governor George Wallace, if you know anything about history, you know, throwing shade up all over that name.
As you should.
He banned the march, but it's the civil rights movement. They got to do what they do. So that ban was ignored. This was the first of 3 protests that was scheduled. 600 marchers headed for the Edmund Pettus Bridge that crossed the Alabama River. That route was a 54-mile stretch of highway from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. Now, we, in the past year, heard quite a bit about the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Yep.
When we lost a great man, John Lewis, this past year. And we know his story and him being involved in the march and being on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So as protesters reached the top of the bridge, they saw what can only be described as terrifying on sight, because on the other side, state troopers were armed with clubs, whips, tear gas, and a sheriff's posse on horseback. When protesters were told to stop and disperse, they refused. Troopers advanced on the marchers. Marchers kept marching. Troopers kept advancing until, of course, they intersect, they clash, and while the troopers clubbed and whipped them, bones were fractured, heads were bashed in. 17 people were hospitalized that day. One of those people was Amelia Boynton, who was beaten unconscious. The media publicized the photo of her lying wounded on the bridge worldwide. This day became known as Bloody Sunday. Viola was horrified by the images of this aborted march on Bloody Sunday. The second of the 3 planned marches took place on March 9th. Again, marchers march. Troopers and police are waiting for them. They clash. Troopers confront the marchers. They confronted each other at the end of the bridge, but when the troopers stepped aside to let them pass, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led the marchers back to the church. He was actually obeying a federal injunction while seeking protection from the federal court for the march. That night, a group of white men beat and murdered civil rights activist James Reeb, a Unitarian Universalist minister from Boston who had come to Selma to march with the second group, along with many other clergy and sympathizers from across the country who had also gathered for the second march. On March 16th, Viola took part in the protest at Wayne State. Later, she called her husband to tell him that she'd be traveling to Selma after she heard Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. call for people of all faiths to come help. Of course, we know Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Day was this past Monday. He's a very impassioned speaker, and she heard him call for help. He said, look, it's going to take all of us. And she took that to heart. He said that the struggle was everybody's fight. And this is a sentiment that continues onto this day. We heard our very own brand new president say we have to be united in this fight. She placed her children in the care of family and friends, and she contacted the SCLC, who gave her the task of welcoming and recruiting volunteers and transporting volunteers and marchers to and from airports, bus terminals, and train stations. She volunteered with complete joy and glee, using her 1963 baby blue Oldsmobile. Now, Adam, I don't know if you know anything about cars, but it's a pretty sleek looking car.
Yeah, no, I have a soft spot in my heart for Oldsmobiles because that was what my family had for years and years. And I don't understand why GM decided to kill it, but there's some pretty good looking cars.
Yeah, and that one right
they
there
got style.
It's pretty sleek looking. March 21st of 1965 was the third march, and more than 3,000 people showed up for the third march. Marchers were Black, they were white, they were doctors, they were nurses, they were working class, they were lower class, they were priests, nuns, rabbis, homemakers, students, actors, farmers. I mean, you name it, from every walk of life. Several famous people participated in this march, including Dr. King, Ralph Bunche, who's an American political scientist, an academic, and diplomat who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1950 for his late 1940s mediation in Israel. He was the first African American to be honored. In 1963, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President John F. Kennedy. Also in attendance at this march, Coretta Scott King, Ralph Abernathy, who's a civil rights activist and Baptist minister. He was a close friend and mentor of Dr. King, a member of the SCLC. And following the assassination of Dr. King in 1968, he led the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C. Also in attendance at this march was a gentleman named Andrew Young, who was a politician, a diplomat, and activist. He was an early leader in the civil rights movement, and he served as executive director of the SCLC and was a close confidant to Dr. King. It took 5 days for the protesters to reach their goal. Viola marched the first full day and returned to Selma for the night. 3 days later, on Wednesday, March 24th, she rejoined the march for 4 miles from the end, where a Night of the Stars celebration was held in the city of St. Jude with performances by Harry Belafonte, Sammy Davis Jr., Joan Baez, and Dick Gregory. I feel like I'm having like a history lesson, and it's like, so, oh, man. So Viola helped at the first aid station. The next day, which was a Thursday, Viola and other marchers reached the state capitol building. That state capitol building had a Confederate flag flying above it. Dr. King addressed the crowd of 25,000 people, and he called the march a shining moment in American history. After the third march concluded on March 25th, Viola, along with Leroy Moton, a 19-year-old Black male who was a high school senior at the time, continued shuttling marchers and volunteers from Montgomery to Selma in her 1963 Oldsmobile. They sang "We Shall Overcome" along the way. Adam, do you know that song?
I do.
When you think about it and think about the time and you think about what they're doing and you imagine that song playing and singing, it just, I don't know, it gets, especially with the way things have been recently, and then thinking about this and thinking about that song, it really hits deep.
It's a beautiful concept of a moment.
So you've got this white woman and this young Black man together shuttling volunteers for these civil rights marches. So Viola and Leroy were driving along Route 80 and a car tried to force them off the road. Viola and Leroy dropped off the passengers that they had in Selma, and then they headed back to Montgomery. They stopped at a local gas station to fill up and buy 2 bottles of Coca-Cola. While they were filling up and buying their soda, they were yelled at and racist slurs were hurled at them. During the drive, Leroy said that Viola started singing the Negro spiritual, "Oh Freedom." "Before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. He had just leaned over to turn the radio dial to the 8 p.m. show Randy's Record Shop out of Nashville. He said it was his favorite show when the driver's side window shattered, spraying glass into the car. The old swerved to the right. It hurtled into a ditch. Leroy said he felt his right shoulder and side of his head hit the dashboard, knocking him unconscious. There were reports of a chase. Leroy disputes that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Gary Rowe says that there was a chase, that he chased Leroy. Leroy says he was never chased. In this car that drove up on Leroy and Viola while they're on their way back from transporting marchers were 4 members of the KKK, including FBI infiltrator Gary Thomas Rowe. Rowe infiltrated the KKK to monitor and disrupt it and incite violence as part of the FBI's COINTELPRO project. He entered the Witness Protection Program as Thomas Neal Moore. He was accused of participating in and helping to plan violent Klan activity against African Americans and civil rights groups. So like I said, the car pulled up alongside Viola and they saw her and Leroy. They shoot directly at Viola. They hit her twice in the head, mortally wounding her. Leroy is covered in blood. Fortunately, he's still alive. Bullets missed him. He's knocked unconscious, so he's motionless when the Klansmen approach the car to check on their 2 victims. They leave. Leroy wakes up and he's able to run for help. He eventually was able to flag down a truck driven by Reverend Leon Riley. Just like Viola and Leroy, Reverend Riley was shuttling civil rights workers back to Selma. Viola's funeral was held at Immaculate Heart of Mary Catholic Church on March 30th in Detroit. There was a ton of prominent members, both from the civil rights movement and the government, in attendance to pay their respects, including Dr. King, NAACP Executive Director Roy Wilkins, Congress on Racial Equality National Leader James Farmer, Michigan Lieutenant Governor William G. Milliken, Teamster President Jimmy Hoffa, and United Auto Workers President Walter Reuther. Viola was buried at Holy Sepulchre Cemetery in Southfield, Michigan. Less than 2 weeks after her death, a charred cross was found in front of 4 Detroit homes, including Viola's. The 4 Klansmen who were in the car responsible for Viola's death were Collie Wilkins, who was 21, Gary Rowe, the FBI informant, age 34, William Eaton, 41, and Eugene Thomas, 42. They were all arrested quickly. Within 24 hours, President Lyndon Johnson appeared on national television to announce their arrest. President Johnson focused on the positive work of the FBI in solving the murders to avoid bad press and divert attention away from the fact that one of the members in that posse was an FBI informant and still protected by the FBI. Collie Wilkins, William Eaton, and Eugene Thomas were indicted in the state of Alabama for Viola's death on April 22nd of 1965. Gary Rowe, however, was not indicted, but served as a witness in the case. Gary testified that Collie Wilkins had fired 2 shots into Viola's car on the order of Eugene Thomas. Gary was placed then, as we talked about, into the Witness Protection Program. There was then a lengthy federal trial. The defendants were charged with conspiracy to intimidate African Americans under the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, a Reconstruction civil rights statute. The charges did not specifically refer to Viola's murder. On December 3rd, the trio was found guilty by an all-white, all-male jury and sentenced to 10 years in prison, which was a landmark in Southern legal history, that these men that killed a woman got 10 years. But hey, it was an all-white male jury, and they still convicted all white men.
Not a landmark you should be proud of.
Right. So that's not the end of the controversy. While out on appeal, Collie Wilkins and Eugene Thomas were each found guilty of firearms violations and were sent to jail. During this time, the January 15th, 1966 edition of the Birmingham News published an ad offering up Viola's car for sale. The ad, which was asking $3,500, read, "Do you need a crowd getter? I have a 1963 Oldsmobile two-door in which Mrs. Viola Liuzzi was killed. Bullet holes and everything intact. Ideal to bring in crowds." They were trying to profit off this poor woman's death. All three defendants, Collie, Eugene, and William Eaton, were convicted on federal murder charges. Then the state murder cases against Eugene Thomas and William Eaton proceeded. William, who was not incarcerated at the time, died of a heart attack on March 6, 1966. Couldn't have happened to a better man. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
You're right. You're right.
The prosecution.
He would have had to spend 30, 40 years in jail.
Yeah, seriously. He got off easy. Seriously. The prosecution built a strong case that included an FBI ballistics expert that testified that the bullet removed from Viola had in fact been fired from a revolver owned by Eugene. As strong as this case was, it was all built on, quote, circumstantial evidence. Two witnesses had testified that they had seen Collie drinking beer at the VFW hall near Birmingham, 125 miles away from the murder scene, an hour or less after shooting Viola, which would mean he couldn't have been there. The jury consisted of 8 African Americans and 4 white males. Despite the makeup of the jury, Eugene is acquitted of the state murder charge after just 90 minutes. The announcement was made the following day. State Attorney General Richmond Flowers Sr. severely criticized the verdict and the Black members of the panel, calling them, quote, Uncle Toms, which, if you don't know your history, that's not good. No. On April 27, 1967, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans upheld the federal convictions of the surviving defendants, Collie and Eugene. Eugene served 6 years in prison. Gary Rowe, who we know served no prison time, but did in fact go into the witness protection program due to death threats from the Klan before and during trial. Gary died in 1998 in Savannah, Georgia. He changed identity several times over the decades. Now, remember, Gary was an FBI informant, so this caused quite the controversy / cover-up. So we're going to go back to the day of the murder. Within 24 hours of Viola's death, the first director of the FBI, who comes with tons of his own controversy, began a smear campaign against Viola. He held a press conference. Subordinate FBI agents and select politicians that with them that said that the marks on her body from the car's shattered windows were actually puncture wounds in her arms, indicating the recent use of a hypodermic needle, alluding to heroin use. Mm-hmm. She was sitting very, very close to that Negro in the car. It had the appearance of a necking party, he said. Now, if we know anything about
necking, you don't do it when you're getting chased by somebody.
Well, let's just go back to J. Edgar Hoover. Again, he comes with many of his own controversies. Rumored lovers, rumored, which, if that's your thing, that's your thing. Rumored cross-dressing. Again, your thing. But you are slandering people when you have your own stuff going on and everybody knows it.
That's usually the people who slander.
That's true.
I don't want to deal with my stuff, so I got to get angry at your stuff.
It was also supposedly rumored and reported that Viola was a member of the Communist Party and that she had abandoned her husband and children to have multiple relationships with various Black males who were also involved in the civil rights movement. This was all done, of course, to obscure the fact that the FBI informant was in the car with the men that murdered her and to ensure that the FBI would not be held responsible for allowing their informant to participate in violent acts without FBI surveillance or backup. The
Wait,
FBI.
I'm sorry. So if they were going to do violent acts, they had to have the FBI involved?
Yeah,
That just
give them the
sounds.
green light.
They're just like, they were like, hey, we want to be invited to the party.
I mean, duh. Sorry, James, my FBI agent listening in my laptop, but it's true. I'm surprised he hasn't cut us off yet.
No, it's fair. I think he just is really excited about the A side. I mean, somebody has to be.
So the FBI was concerned that they would be held accountable for Gary's involvement in the murder, seeing as Gary had been an informant with them since 1960. And the FBI was well aware of all of Gary's violent Klan activities. On the day of Viola's murder, Gary called the FBI and notified them that he and 4 Klansmen were traveling to Montgomery to participate in Klan activities, and that violence was a part of that plan. Autopsy results in 1965 showed no traces of drugs in Viola's system, and that she had not had sex recently at the time of her death. The FBI's role in the smear campaign was uncovered in 1978 when Viola's children obtained case documents from the FBI under the Freedom of Information Act. Racist organizations condemned Viola's activism and civil rights movement participation and said that she brought the death upon herself. Viola put herself out there for an amazing cause, and her death is the only one scrutinized while male activists are hailed as heroes. She's slandered for doing the right thing.
An entire political system gaslighted the public about her.
Yes. In 1978, Gary Rowe was indicted and tried for his involvement in the murder. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second ended in acquittal. So again, the FBI informant wins. On May 27, 1983, Judge Charles Wycliffe Joyner rejected claims made by Viola's family in a lawsuit, saying there was no evidence that the FBI was in a conspiracy against Mrs. Liuzzi or any type of joint venture. Rowe's presence in the car was the principal reason why the case was solved so quickly, they say. The family attorney, his name was Dean A. Robb, expressed the family's dismay, saying, "This is a terrible opinion. I'm shocked. I think this is incredible." In August of 1983, the FBI was awarded $79,873 in court costs, but the fees were later reduced to $3,645 after the ACLU appealed on behalf of Viola's family. Viola has left a lasting legacy. The Walter P. Reuther Library contains original archive material surrounding Viola and her case. The Viola papers contain documentation of the events surrounding her murder, the investigation of her murder, and the later legal involvement of her family. Now, remember, I mentioned her friend earlier, the reason that really spurred her into getting into the civil rights movement, her friend Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Her friend Sarah would actually become the permanent caretaker of her 5 young children after her death. Viola was featured in part 3 of the documentary series Free at Last, Civil Rights Heroes. Others featured in that documentary: Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, the Birmingham Four, Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was an Army vet who was trying to protect his mother from a policeman who had thrown her to the ground, James Reeb, who we mentioned earlier, who's actually a white pastor. I should have mentioned that and I failed to. I'm sorry. Amongst others. Her murder was also shown in episode 2 of the King miniseries. Viola Liuzzo Park is located at Winthrop and Trojan in Detroit. Again, she's the only white female honored at the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. In 2004, she was the subject of a documentary called Home of the Brave. In 2008, Viola's story was memorialized in a song called Colorblind Angel by late blues singer Robin Rogers on her album Treat Me Right. Some of the lyrics. Viola, Viola, you laid your young life down from Selma to heaven. 3 Ks took you out. Colorblind angel battled bigotry. Viola, Viola lives on in history. Season 6, episode 3 of the CBS drama Cold Case was loosely based on Viola's story. In 2011, the Viola Liuzzo Ethics Scholarship was started at Adrian College by her grandson, Joshua James Liuzzo. Adam, as a theater guy, you'll really like this. In 2014, Outside Agitator was written by the 20% Theater's artistic associate, Laura Nessler. It was inspired and based on Viola's story. The play premiered at the Prop Theater in Chicago on September 20th of 2014, excuse me. In the movie Selma from 2014, Viola is actually featured in that. She's portrayed by Tara Ox, which I've seen that movie. And at the time, the name meant nothing to me. And now I'm like, oh my gosh. You know what I mean?
Time to rewatch.
Yes. And in 2015, Wayne State bestowed its first posthumous honorary doctorate degree to Viola. And in 2019, which was not that long ago, a statue which honors Viola's memory was unveiled in Detroit. That is the incredible, amazing, tragic, heroic story of Viola Liuzzo. I just felt at a time like this, it needed to be her story needs to be told regardless. And I just felt like with her being such an ally, it really needed attention.
No, you're right.
It was heavy. It was very heavy. I just felt like her story needs to be told.
Yes. You're absolutely right. And it is important that we talk about uncomfortable things, because we cannot live in a world where we pretend that everything is happy or fine or easy to sweep under the rug, or we need to face reality.
Mm-hmm.
But damn, I'm sad.
But she did amazing things.
I know, but she shouldn't have.
Her life ended way too soon. Yes, it did. Yeah. But if you would like to help, there are ways to do that. You can log on to our website, and we have ways that you can help, like the NAACP, the ACLU. All of that information is on our website, asidebsidepodcast.square.site. But there you go. That's the B-side.
Yeah. So take this sad thing, and if it can motivate you to do something good, then it's just another credit to who these people were.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100%. All right. Don't forget, bad vibes save lives. Get that on a shirt. Oh, wait, you can. It's on our website.
That's weird.
I know. Imagine.
Who saw that coming?
A-side, B-side podcast.square.site. Also, again, if you'd like to support excuse me. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so.
I know. I get choked up when I talk about websites too. It's just,
I know.
It's a lot. It's emotional.
It's sexy.
No one has ever said a website is sexy.
If you'd like to support the show, again, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/A-side-B-side-pod. Again, that money is used for production and promotion of the show. And yes, occasional cups of coffee.
Yes. And thank you, Janice.
Yes,
I accept your apology for beating me in the geography bee.
Let's see. We've got, another way you can help us is you can log on to Apple. Even if you don't use Apple to listen, let's say you listen on Spotify or on Stitcher, but you can still head on over to Apple and give us a rating and a review. And that also helps push us up in the numbers on Apple and helps the show as well.
Yeah, it's because a change of 1% on Apple, because they have so many listeners and so much volume, will be worth a change of 10% anywhere else. I mean, it's a weird internet social media thing, but it's the truth.
All right. I think that we've got it all, Adam.
Good, because I had to go to sleep.
Me too. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for listening. Adam, thanks.
Thank you, Brooke.
This is Kevin Armstrong, your host for Movie Battle. Each episode, we take 2 films and put a superfan of each against one another to decide which one is best. The only rule we have is that you come correct. If you're interested in being a guest on Movie Battle, please check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
As always, thank you for listening to A-Side, B-Side podcast. If you enjoy the show, please, if you don't mind, head on over to Apple and leave us a rating or a review. And if you'd like to continue to support the podcast, you can do so by heading on over to Patreon, or you can buy us a coffee, as well as buying merch on our website, asidebsidepodcast.square.site. From Adam and I at A-Side, B-Side podcast, please remember to wear your mask, social distance if you're around people that don't live in your household, and just be safe and happy. Thanks again from us here at A-Side, B-Side podcast.